So good morning, everyone. This is Melissa Colesman, Associate Commissioner of Student Learning at the Colorado Department of Education. And I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Marianne Snyder, the Director of the Office of Early Childhood at the Colorado Department of Human Services. First, I'll just do a quick sound check. Those of you who are on Zoom with us, I'm just doing a check to see, can you hear us okay? Do a thumbs up, maybe? Yeah, thumbs up. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
Great.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, thank you, everyone, for your patience in getting started today. I don't know about anybody else, but I was completely taken by surprise by the snow. And I thought maybe it was because I didn't really pay attention to the weather like I should have. But it feels like there might have been a consensus that everyone else was as well. So that made me feel a little better.
The timing was extremely unusual.
Yes, and unfortunate as well. So those of you who are participating remotely, you are doing a very smart thing. So thank you for joining us. Those of you who braved the roads, thank you for being here. I'm glad that so far we have heard that everyone is safe, and hopefully everyone keeps safe for today. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first meeting today. And so I want to ahead of time say thank you to Chris Miller, who is being not just a meeting participant, but tech guy for today, and making sure that we are well set up. So thank you so much, Chris. And also he'll be advancing slides and such. So we'll go ahead and get started. So just take a look at our agenda on slide 2. So those of you who are in the room, we do have a printed handout of the agenda as well as the PowerPoint presentation. We'll make sure, I don't think we sent the PowerPoint presentation in advance, but we'll make sure that everyone gets that. For our agenda today, we want to start out with obviously welcome introductions. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about roles and responsibilities, talk about some of our norms that we would like for this group, then make sure we have a firm grounding on the background of House Bill 181333, which kind of prompted this work today. And we'll dig in for some content around some current activities, which is the study that has been initiated. So we want to get make sure you have an understanding of that and get some of your thoughts on that, as well as a cost study that's also part of this process. And again, to get your thoughts on that. We'll talk about next steps, and then we will close. So because we've lost a few minutes to begin with, we'll try to keep things moving. If anybody at any time feels like we're shortchanging something that's important, please make your voice known so that we don't shortchange. If we don't get through everything that we thought we would, that's fine. We would rather just make sure that we are really taking advantage of this opportunity to hear from folks. And don't want anybody to feel silenced due to a compressed time.
I'll save the chat, so it'll go into a file, and we'll have a transcript of it, so we can capture some things in there if we can't get to it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, we'll go ahead and take a moment to do some introductions. So we'll look, first of all, in the room here at the Department of Education. So I'll just kind of point to and ask G to start us off, and then we'll kind of go around the table.
Sure. Virginia, or G, my nickname, Winter. I am on contract to work since last August with work group that was put together for House Bill 181333, and then the work continued on with me helping to manage the process. So that I have my own firm. Many of you are familiar with me. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Mary Martin, and I am the Director of the Division of Community and Family Support at the Office for Early Childhood at CDHS. And my division is where the Early Intervention Programs live.
I'm Laura Morales. I'm the Early Childhood Initiatives Manager for the office. I manage the office for the Office for Early Childhood. I manage the office's legislative and budget work, and I'm a former service coordinator of Rocky Mountain Human Services.
And I'm Christy Scott, and I am the Early Intervention Program Director at under the Office of Early Childhood.
And I'm Colleen Batchelor with the Resource Exchange down in Colorado Springs, one of the early intervention programs. and also an adjunct professor at University of Northern Colorado for the Early Childhood Special Education program.
I need to talk to you about that.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Marianne Snyder, and I am the Director of the Office of Early Childhood at the Colorado Department of Human Services.
And good morning. I've introduced myself. I'm Melissa Colesman.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to turn the camera. I'm Chris Miller. I'm the Child Science Specialist at the Colorado Department of Education.
Good morning, I'm Heidi McCaslin. I'm the preschool director here at CDE, and I oversee state-funded preschool and the birth to 3 child find and preschool child find processes.
Hi, hi everybody. I'm Barbara Buswell, and I'm the executive director of Peak Parent Center, which is Colorado's federally funded parent training and information center. And so we have responsibility for supporting families from birth to age 26.
Good morning, I'm Paul Post. I'm the Executive Director of the Exceptional Student Services Unit here at CDE.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Loventhal, and I'm Melissa at Melvin.
And for those folks who are on the phone,
I don't think they can hear very well.
Okay.
Maybe when we get to the end of
okay, so we'll just make sure we speak up if you're not close to a microphone. So that everyone doesn't start speaking at once on the phone, what I think I'll do is I have the list of the names of folks who aren't in the room. So I'll say your name and if you give your background, and I'll also apologize if I say your name incorrectly. So Sarah Bonnell.
Hi, yes, this is Sarah Bonnell. I'm the director here in Mesa County over our early intervention program.
Thank you. John Paul Burden.
He's unable to join this morning.
Great. Moira Hawks.
Hi, I'm Moira Hawks. I am Special Ed Director at East Central BOCES and also representing the consortium at Northern Region of Special Ed Directors as well.
Thank you. Lucinda Hundley.
She may be en route.
Yeah, she may be en route.
Okay. Thank you. So Troy Lang.
Hey, good morning. This is Troy Lang. I'm the Executive Director for the Colorado River BOCES as well as a consortium rep.
Thank you. Cindy Lichty.
She's en route.
No, she's Is Cindy muted?
No.
She may have had to step away.
Hi, this is Cindy. This is Cindy Lichty. I'm the Vice President of Programs at Developmental Pathways Community Center Board for Arapahoe County, Douglas County, the City of Aurora, and also here for Alliance.
Thank you. Nancy Ketchum.
Don't believe it.
Sarah's representing.
Oh, Sarah is great. Amanda, is it Pedro?
Good morning. I'm Amanda Pedro from Rocky Mountain Human Services, and I am one of the early intervention supervisors.
Great. Is there anybody I've missed? Well, excellent. Well, thank you again.
And I see where, and Moira, Troy, please feel free to correct me on this, but it looks like Lucinda actually had declined this because she's in California.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you for clarifying. Well, wonderful. So let's go ahead and we're going to move forward with and talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. So first of all, we appreciate your acceptance of our invitation to be part of our House Bill 18-1333 Leadership Advisory Group. We wanted to take a couple of minutes talking about what are the roles and responsibilities that we're asking of you, and what do we see our role and responsibilities as in implementing this particular piece of legislation. The Departments of Human Services and Education have come together to actually embark on our responsibilities with implementation of this piece of legislation, which was quite ambitious. The timeline was ambitious, the scope of it is ambitious, and so the two agencies have been meeting for a number of months, for many hours at a time, and to guide our work, what we have done is establish some principles of engagement for ourselves. We'll be asking similar things of this group, which is, you know, another way of talking about that is our norms and expectations. Our work group, which I believe is listed further in this presentation. You'll see all of the members of this. But we have the work group, which you see actually around the table, and we've introduced ourselves today, have established kind of our decision-making process and our roles and responsibilities around implementation of this. And I thought that we'd take a moment for Chris to go ahead and display kind of our principles of engagement. We wanted you to be aware of what guides our interactions. We're going to just take a moment to, rather than read these out loud to you, we're going to display them both in the on the screen, and for those of you who are watching at home or in your office, you can see there. So, so Chris, if you could scroll just a little bit so we can see those. I'm going to pause right about there. So. So, first of all, as I read these again with fresh eyes, and actually, you know how like when you have people over to your house and you look at your house through fresh eyes because you know that somebody's going to be looking at that, like that weird counter thing you've got going on. Looking at this kind of through those fresh eyes of knowing that you're seeing this for the first time, what jumps out at me is just what we've striven to do throughout this whole process is around engagement of stakeholders and thinking of our constituencies. We know that during this whole process, because of the compressed timeline and the volume of work that needs to be complete, we are just now in the ability to actually engage an advisory group. But I did want you to know that we have had this commitment to making sure voices are heard, being able to improve relationships with stakeholders and increase those relationships with stakeholders through this process. So we strive towards that, and we are committed to that, and we welcome additional feedback on how we can improve that going forward as well. Is there any question or comments that you as leadership advisory members would like to make about our principles of engagement?
They look great to me.
Okay. Thank you, Barb. So, so what you'll see there is that we have had a desire to come forward with joint recommendations that come out of this whole study and process, and that we are committed to consensus decision making through this. And so what we wanted to do is let you know that our commitment is to hear you and your perspectives in this process, to take that into account as we make decisions, and when we are unable to follow perhaps some advice that you may give us, are committed to explaining the rationale for why, or only if we're only able to meet part of what you recommend, we'll be sure to explain why. So that is our commitment to you and to this group. So Chris, if you could go back to the slideshow. Thank you very much. So, so because we're the ones tasked with implementing this legislation, we recognize we have a responsibility for really responsible decision making around this work. We're asking for you to provide us input at times and feedback at times. And I'm going to distinguish those two for you, because I think sometimes we can use them interchangeably. And when that happens, I think there's confusion that can be drawn. So there will be times when we come to you as a leadership advisory group with a request for input, meaning we have not yet made a decision or began implementing something. And we would like to get your perspective on our plans for that implementation or our thinking on that decision. So we're going to be asking for your input. There's other times when a decision or something is already in process, and we're going to be asking you feedback on that, how to improve that. What are some things that we could consider, like what are some of the obstacles we might face and how we might address those? And so we just wanted to make that clear, because if there's something already in process, it's that means that a decision has already been made and it's already ongoing. And so input is really not appropriate at that time. So I just wanted to distinguish between those. Is that, how does that fit with folks? Does that make sense?
Great.
Okay. Folks in the Zoom meeting?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Great. So then getting to your role and expectations, what we'd like to share with you again is what we ask for your role in this process is, well, first of all, we ask that you are present at the meetings. Our expectations are that you're present either in person or online. We are committed to ensuring that the meetings are documented, so that's what Rachel will be doing for us. She'll be taking high-level notes for us, and we will be disseminating those to all members. So if we do know that there's unforeseen circumstances that make it such that you can't be a part of the meeting, or that you might have a previous commitment, but we will be committed to sending those notes out. And from you are free to share those notes with any of your stakeholders as you represent them. In terms of the charter for the group, I don't know that we didn't pull that up necessarily as part of the meeting notes. So I'm going to see if I can pull that up on mine. We can display it if you think we should find it in the. I'll read it out. I think you all have this because it was all part of the invitation, but I'll just read it out loud, which is the charter of this group is that your purpose is to engage with CDHS and CDE as thought partners on issues related to the study of early intervention evaluations. What we have done for the composition of this group is to make sure that the membership is comprised of persons with leadership responsibility in organizations with a stake in creating a more seamless early intervention evaluation system for families and children. You're invited to give voice to this perspective of those in your role through participating on this work group. And this work group will just be one aspect of our stakeholder input, and I think this will be explained a bit further later on as to how the remainder of the work plan will be implemented to engage further stakeholders throughout the process. But we see you really as representing those key stakeholders and helping us, having those stakeholders have a direct contact with the decision making of these two agencies as we go along. So what I would like to do is just get a sense from members. How are you feeling about the clarity of your role and the expectations for your participation? Do you have questions or clarifications that we can provide? Okay, so Colleen and Barb are okay.
Not at this time.
Okay, so it looks like folks are good with that. Does somebody have something to say?
Nope, I said none from me.
Great, great. Well, what we thought we would do is now just take another moment. So Chris, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. What we wanted to be able to do is just take a few moments to, as a group, talk about what norms do you think would be valuable for you as a leadership advisory group to adhere to while we're together in this space? What have you found to be productive in similar situations?
Given the number of people that are participating remotely. I would say just making sure that we are allowing time and intention to make sure that they're being included, because I think that can get difficult sometimes.
Okay. So you're suggesting that we want to allow time for all to be heard, especially considering remote participation? Okay. So I'm seeing nodding in the room. Those of you who are online, does that seem like something to adhere to?
You bet.
Yes.
That sounds good.
Other ideas?
Seeing that, you know, the expectation for participation is pretty high, you know, meetings got scheduled without maybe reflecting the calendars of the working group. So I don't know if we want to consider evaluating those meeting dates, or if we're conflicted, then we just have to miss. So I'd like some clarity about that, maybe from the group.
So Troy, are you suggesting that perhaps, I mean, one thing that we could do offline would be to send out just a quick email kind of outside of the discussion time to see how these meetings work for folks, and if we find that there's particular dates that are truly problematic for a lot of folks, that we can reschedule those. Would that be useful, Troy?
Yeah, that'd be great. I just don't want you to feel that I'm disengaged if I do have a conflict with one of the dates.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Great. We can do that as a follow-up.
And I think that's also a norm that he may be asking for. I'm not sure, Troy, if you are asking, it could be also a group norm that because the expectation is commitment to these dates or to remote access through a Zoom, that if you miss a meeting, that we accept that, but that you are committed generally.
So perhaps commitment to participate in all meetings to the extent possible.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
We were to give you the name of an alternate.
Okay.
If we can't be here, which of course makes sense in terms of design, but I wonder about sending alternates in and out. If this is really going to be a cohesive group, I think that the commitment to participate, even if it's remotely, electronically, would be much better than trying to get people up to speed, even though, of course, I'll share this with our backup person. Does that make sense? It does.
And Chris is recording this as well, so that for those folks who can't make a meeting, that we'll make those recordings available so that folks can get up to speed. Is there anything else that you found to be really helpful in group situations to make sure that the group functions productively? A couple that come to mind are things like presume positive intent, enable all voices to be heard, things like that. Would the group like to put any of those out, those types of things out? Absolutely. Okay. So Colleen is shaking her head.
Yes.
Would those two be okay? Well, let's do one at a time. Are people okay with the first one of presuming positive intent?
Yes.
Okay. What about the allow all voices to be heard?
Yes.
Is there anything, we can revisit these and I don't want to belabor it, but if there are some others that you think that we ought to consider right now, please bring that up. Otherwise, if there's something that comes up, maybe we find that there's some things that aren't working as smoothly and that we would like to offer a norm at the beginning of each, at a meeting to address something that might have happened, we can allow that. Is there anything else for the good of the order right now?
Go ahead.
The only thing I'm thinking back to your operating guidelines, I think that trying to minimize side conversations really helps, because otherwise it seems chaotic and disenfranchises people too.
looks like in the room that we're okay. Those of you participating remotely, minimizing side conversations?
Yes.
And then Troy?
I think, I don't know if it's a norm or not, but I think we need to be really clear about how decisions are going to be made by the group. I know you talked about input and feedback, but maybe, we need to articulate what is the decision-making capacity. I'm still a little fuzzy on that, so I don't know if you had intended to cover that with those slides, or if that, and if so, then I think we need to probably make sure that we know.
So Troy, this is just a question. So are you thinking that it would be important for the advisory group to have a single voice and provide a single decision regarding the advice that you're giving us, or is that what you're suggesting?
I think we just need to understand my assumption typically would be that we try to work towards a consensus recommendation. And if that recommendation is going to whom to actually make the final decision, how that decision gets made. If the agencies, for instance, make a decision that's in opposition to our recommendation, in a fairly consensus recommendation, then that might. I just think we need to be really clear about that, so people don't have hard feelings about stuff. I don't know that we always have to have a clear consensus around our recommendation, and so in those cases, then we would want to understand the protocol under which a decision would be made up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And why don't we, I think that can be something that we have a more kind of dedicated discussion at our next meeting. I think what we'd like to be able to do is kind of come forward with something perhaps more articulated than the general kind of information that we've shared so far, and get reaction from, so that, because I think that where we have been coming from with respect to the role of this group would be that as we are making decisions, we as in the two state agencies are making decisions with respect to this implementation of this bill, that we would be coming to you to get your perspective on those, and that we'd be committed to hearing that, to taking that into consideration. And if we cannot implement everything that the group says, that we'd be committed to telling you the rationale. So I think that's what we have right now that we can share, but it sounds like you would like something a little bit more concrete.
No, I don't know that I need anything concrete. I mean, if really all you're asking for is our opinions and our thoughts about stuff, then that's fine. I think it's important that those of us who are investing time in this, obviously a really critical process, understand, and I think you explained it well. If when the two agencies make a decision that might be not necessarily in opposition, but might not be able to address the full consideration of, let's say, a pretty large body of us, that we understand why, and maybe we have a second chance to think it through. So, but if you're not asking me to actually make a decision, then I know that up front, and I know that I shouldn't expect to have as a commitment or decision-making authority or contribution.
Yeah, thank you, Troy. That clarification I think is really helpful, and I think everyone in this group, I'm sure has been a part, had to make decisions and realize that there are multiple stakeholders that have very different perspectives, and that at some point there's always a judgment call that needs to be made. And so, what we would be committed to is making sure that we are hearing as much as we can, because we want to make the best decisions possible. At some point there always will need to be a judgment call, and G would like to share something.
I think Troy did a wonderful thing here. It made me think you might want to add this to your norms, and that is an honest question, asking question, honesty. This is a very healthy question to ask of a new group forming, is clarity on whether it does or it doesn't have decision-making powers in and of itself. And I think the clarity that's necessary today has been given by probably Melissa, and nothing more needs to be said about that. But your role as thought partners is your principal role, and also that you're speaking with one voice when you are giving input or giving feedback is what we could work on in a future meeting, so that you do feel like you do have that unity of input, or that unity of feedback, or diversity thereof, but that is your product, and you need to be clear on how that gets delivered up.
And I would add to that, this is Mary Ann, that to the extent that consensus or understanding, maybe not even consensus, that occurs within this group as we, work through some pretty tough decisions and, complex delivery of important services, that you share that with your constituents so that there is a collective better understanding. That's going to help a lot.
Oh, well, great. So I think we're going to move on and hand off to Mary Ann. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really excited that we've gotten to this part of the process. And I just wanted to quickly review why we're here. So House Bill 1813-33 passed last session. The legislature has always been an amazing supportive body for the work of early intervention. So this legislation came about with all good intent to make sure that as this program moves forward, we're delivering it in as high quality and best practice as possible. So to that end, the Department of Human Services and the Department of Education were required to enter into an interagency agreement by October 1st to study the administration of the early intervention evaluations. I believe everyone has received a copy of that, correct?
Yes.
Yep, okay. So the purpose of this agreement is to complete a study and then report to the Joint Budget Committee by June 30th of this year, joint recommendations for the administration of the early intervention evaluations. And Heidi and Christy will be going into further detail about that study in the upcoming slides. So we, as you can see, and Melissa talked about already this morning, phase one was the development of the interagency agreement. We did hit the deadline. That was a good bucket of work. Thank you, G, for guiding us through that process. We are now starting, we're into phase two of the implementation study. And again, Christy and Heidi will address that in some upcoming slides, but we have entered into a contract with a vendor, and they'll discuss that. So this group, of course, is going to be instrumental in reviewing the outcomes of that study and helping us make final recommendations to the Joint Budget Committee, which again are due June of this year. I want to reiterate the support that the legislature has given the early intervention program in the time that I have been here, which is already 6 years, and I know there's a long history of always fully funding and supporting early intervention. And to that end, I just want to report
that it's very typical for the department to go after a caseload increase. And we did, in fact, do that recently through what's called a supplemental. We asked the legislature for approximately $1,700,000. They actually approved $3,200,000. So, I mean, it just again speaks to the commitment that Colorado has for this program. So I'm really proud of that. And then finally, you can see again who is the membership in the next slide of the department's interagency agreement work group. I'm not going to read those, but you can see them and the roles that we all play. Are there any questions before we move into the next phase? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to Heidi and Christy.
Great, thanks, Mary Ann and Melissa. Christy and I are going to give a bit of an overview of the study component, which in the previous slide was shown as phase 2 of this kind of 4-part work that we're doing over the course of this year. And as you're aware, the interagency agreement suggested that we would hire a contractor to conduct the elements that are required as a part of the study. And from the time that the interagency agreement was signed in late September, we were working diligently in getting a vendor approved for that. You can see in the next slide here that Marzano Research was awarded a contract to conduct the study. And this slide gives a little bit of information about them. They're not available today to share this overview, but they will be at the future Leadership Advisory Group meeting to share an update on the study in each of the work group meetings. And APA is a subcontractor of Marzano. We're actually expecting Mark Furmanek, I think I'm saying his name right, today to share about the cost analysis. So he should be joining us any moment. He may be held up by the weather today. But wanted to just give you some information about these two groups that are involved in all of the elements of the study, which is quite complex and has a number of components. We'll talk about those here in just a minute. The next slide just gives an overview again of the purpose of the study. And if you've read the agreement and the legislation, you know, even in more detail the purpose, but essentially it's really to study the administration of early intervention evaluation. And by that, we're using that term as it's defined in the federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act under Part C. So it's really about that initial evaluation that's conducted for children who need to have eligibility established for Part C of IDEA. And all of the current known information about how that's currently being done is being gathered and reviewed, and a lot of additional information is being collected as a part of this. And so Christy will share in these next few slides about the specific work plan and the phases of the work that Marzano is leading.
Thanks, Heidi. So the work plan that we've developed with Marzano really lays out all of this work that needs to occur in a very short timeline. And so the first piece of it is reviewing existing data related to the early intervention evaluation. Both the departments have several different mechanisms to collect data, and so we pulled all the data that we have and we kind of put it in a little a data vault, I guess. I don't know what I'm trying to say. And so Marzano is actually pulling that data and kind of looking at it with a different lens from a study aspect of what they can pull apart and gather from the data that we already have. We're in the process of planning for our collecting and analyzing stakeholder feedback. And of course, this is one of the mechanisms for stakeholder feedback. And we also have some other, which we will talk about in a little bit, different ways that we'll be collecting stakeholder feedback. One of the other charges is to determine an appropriate evaluation tool or tools for initial EI evaluations. We have multiple tools being used across the state, and so we're collecting information on those tools, and that'll be part of what we look at during the study, is what tools we're using and how they may be influencing eligibility or not influencing types of eligibility across the state. We also, of course, a big major component of any work we do is families and their children, and so family satisfaction data is also going to be collected, and we're in the final process of determining how that will occur. But what we do know is that Marzano will be able to take on that work, so we won't have to put that on our private participants to collect that data. We know that that's kind of a heavy lift to be able to get surveys to families and get families to respond. This is talking about collecting and analyzing family satisfaction data related to pilots, and we will be doing that, but we are also going to be collecting some family satisfaction data for those families that are not engaged in the pilots to get a broader perspective. We're also looking at collecting data not just from the pilot communities, but also those areas across the state that are not participating in the pilots. We have quite a few community-centered boards and administrative units or school districts participating in the pilots, but probably not as broad as we would like it to be. So we want to make sure that we're getting data from entities that are really reflective of the state and all of the different demographics. And another piece of what we're doing is collecting and analyzing cost data, which Mark, who just arrived, will talk about in a little bit, and we're glad you made it safely. And and so that's a big project as well. Marzano will be supporting the development of our broad recommendations for stakeholder feedback, and so through this whole process of getting stakeholder feedback as we make decisions, at the end of the day, the two departments have to submit recommendations to the legislature, and so we want to make sure that we get good stakeholder feedback of those final recommendations, and Marzano will be helping us put that together. While it'll be recommendations we make, they'll support us in putting that in a format that's palatable. Then again, supporting development of components for the final report. So the next slide talks about the layers of stakeholder feedback, and we've had a lot of discussions about how what those layers might look like and how to engage the different stakeholders. And so we kind of distilled them down to upstream, midstream, and downstream. And upstream would be considered those stakeholders that really do have implications as it relates to policy, processes, fiscal impact, and the systems as a whole. And examples are the special education directors, CCB directors, and any interagency councils that we have that are advising those upstream types of activities, and this group would be considered comprised of upstream participants. Midstream are those stakeholders that really impact how the evaluations are implemented, and the example would be child find staff, EI directors, and service coordinators. And downstream would be the satisfaction with the process of the early intervention evaluations and their involvement, and that's our children and their families and their caregivers. And the next slide is, again, the study timeline. And so December through January, we're planning for the study. February for April, we're collecting data. So we're madly getting some purchase orders in place for those pilot communities so that we can start collecting data. Marzano is also, and we're also looking at the cost data and finalizing how we're going to do that, and the family satisfaction data. And then May through June, we're we're taking everything that we've learned, putting them together in recommendations and a report. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the pilot communities, how they were chosen, and
okay. Do you want me to take that? Okay. So the pilots, as they are outlined in the interagency agreement, are around, we've got two pieces to the interagency agreement, but the major component is around those in-home pilots. And so those are communities that are willing to do evaluations in a family's home. And that's really what they have to agree to do, and to collect kind of a pretty heavy lift in data collection around those in-home pilots. And if they're willing to do those two things, then they qualify for a pilot. So what we did is we put out notification that we were ready to get going on the pilots and asking people to submit their interest. We did a webinar to go into more detail about what the statement of work would look like. And I don't know that we didn't send that, did we? But we certainly can provide that if people are interested in seeing that. And then we just wrapped up for all of the communities that were interested. We actually had a call with them to go through the data collection requirements, because we felt that was an important component before they could really determine whether they were interested or not. And so then they submitted all of the interested either administrative units or community-centered boards, sent us what they felt their budget would look like, and their interest, and sort of a brief outline of how they felt it might look in their community. Some were choosing to do just a certain demographic. Some were going to do all of them, depending on the size of the community and what they were interested in doing. And so we're able to just enter into purchase orders with any interested communities. And so those are all with our fiscal unit being processed right now. We do, and I want to say, can't tell you the exact number, but I can look it up and tell you. We have a couple we're waiting to come in that we can get processed, but
it was a big field of original interest in late December, and then
the data collection has been a deterrent for several communities.
Sure.
And just because it's feeling like, yeah, and the difference is that if they're doing, you know, we've allocated money out for these evaluations in the past through different mechanisms, depending if you're an AU or a community-centered board. But the whole purpose is to reimburse for the entire cost of an evaluation, and so we need the communities to report on what those costs are, so we have a real picture of what it is, so that no matter what our recommendations are, we can ensure that it's funded to the level that it needs to be. And so even though we're reimbursing for the full cost of the evaluation, some of the communities felt they just shouldn't have the capacity to spend the time collecting the data. And we've had both community center boards and administrative units decide that it was too much.
Great.
Any other questions?
Yeah, piggybacking on that, I think it'd be helpful to me to understand once we have those POs approved, who the pilots are, so that we can look at representation in Colorado. Obviously, you know, we are a largely rural state, and make sure that there's sufficient so that we can validate the data. You did a great job at explaining that, though. And then I wanted just to make sure that folks really think about superintendents in that upstream communication stakeholder feedback area. I also serve on the CASA board, and legislation was passing, and the conversations that occurred at the superintendent's level were important. I think it's going to be important to keep them in the loop. And then your conversation also reminded me we probably need a parking lot strategy somewhere. So I don't know how we want to handle parking lot considerations.
So this is Melissa. So we can go ahead and kind of establish that as a routine. Is there something you'd like to put on the parking lot?
Yeah, I have just a couple of things. I think it's really important that we recognize that anytime we have change like this, it causes undue fear and angst amongst and I think it would be helpful for us just to articulate what, what those things are so that we can respond to them from a communication standpoint. And I think the biggest one that I'm hearing is it's the end of January, school districts are budgeting and going to enter into contracts with staff, and we need to make sure that, as this process goes forward, we don't put school districts in a position where they have committed staff to a position and then are.
So, yeah, Troy, Marianne, I think is going to address a little bit. We'll tag team something, because I think we can address a little bit of angst right now.
Because we've actually heard this a lot already, and so it's important to know that the report is due to the Joint Budget Committee in June. So nothing will happen during the 1920 state fiscal year. I'm looking at Lauren Morales.
I think not. I mean, we wouldn't be able to, the soonest we would be able to make any kind of legislative.
Okay.
As soon as we'd be able to make any kind of legislative change would be the 2020 legislative session.
And we do need legislative change before any new recommendations can go forward. So at least for your budget process, starting now, it shouldn't be affected.
Yeah, the current obligation of administrative units to perform evaluations is in state statute. So if there would be a change needed either to the education statute or to the early intervention rules, that would require a process.
And I think it's further important for us who have direct contact with the legislature to always keep in mind that at least we would try to build in transition time if there were any changes. I've certainly experienced this many, many times where they'll pass legislation and expect you to implement the next day, and that doesn't work that way. So we will definitely pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I think that'd be great in our, as we put communication out about this to address that one,
So connected to that, and on the flip side, for those of us who are trying to build out the pilot, the effort that is going to establish the staff in order to do that also becomes the question for July 1, too, of what then happens with that whole system we've tried to develop in parts. It's certainly not a complete system.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so the next piece of the day is Mark Hermanich, who's from ATA, and as Heidi mentioned, that's one of the people that's helping us with our study, and this is the organization taking on our cost study. So Mark's going to describe how that's going to look.
Okay, thanks. Apologize for cutting it a little close, but drove out from Evergreen and took 2 hours. So I work with APA. We're working with Marzano to do the cost study for part of this. And APA's been around, it's Colorado-based. We've been around since '83, and one of our areas of focus is looking at early childhood education costs. We can go on to the next slide. So this is what we're hoping to learn from the cost study. And certainly if any of you have any other thoughts about what we should be looking for, we'd be happy to hear about those. But, first of all, just getting an overall sense of what the costs are for the early intervention evaluation. There doesn't seem to be a lot of information out there right now. So we would hope to be able to tell you sort of what the cost per evaluation is, and that would be both sort of the average cost and then the range of costs. And that range could vary according to type of evaluation, the settings, whether it's in a home or whether it's some other organizations, and also across regions. Some of the things we're looking at or would include in the cost would be obviously the cost of staff time, so the amount of time that the evaluation staff and the child find coordination and service coordination staff spend with each evaluation. And essentially we're looking at this from the period of time from when a referral is made until the time when an eligibility determination is made. We're also hoping to get some sense of what kind of overhead costs are, so the administration that relates directly to the provision of evaluations, and some other kind of generalized overhead costs. So essentially what we hope to be able to give you all would be a fairly comprehensive idea of what the costs of the evaluations are. So how are we going to go about doing this? First of all, we'll start looking at existing administrative data. So I think the departments have just provided a lot of information to Marzano. We haven't had a chance to go through it yet. It's still sort of being sorted out, but we'll be doing that, I'm sure, in the next week or so. Then we're also going to do online surveys of members who are participating in evaluations, as well as child find coordination and service coordination. So for the people serving in the pilots, we haven't, I think, decided, or at least agreed upon an exact approach, but what we're thinking about doing is that probably for maybe a time period of a month, we would ask, or I'm sorry, we would, for the data collection period, we would be sending out these online evaluations, and these would be distributed to every evaluation team working in the pilot organization doing pilot evaluations. And we'd be asking different types of things, you know, how long have they spent at the evaluation, how many people were at the evaluation, who these people were, their credentials, were there travel costs, were there any other costs associated with the evaluation. We're also going to be doing some online surveys as well as in-depth interviews with both those providers who are part of the pilot, as well as a sample of providers who are not part of the pilot, just to get an idea of how the pilot costs may compare to what is the norm today. So get a sense, are those costs going to be larger, smaller, or about the same. And we have yet to determine who those providers will be, but they'll be somewhere between 7, 8, 9 providers statewide. We'll try to make a selection of those providers based on sort of region, size, that sort of thing. And so what we would do for them more than likely would be, for instance, for doing the online evaluations, we would figure out, basically hope that they would provide us the cost data for evaluations done within a very specific point of time, so maybe 30 days, maybe 6 to 45 days, something like that, until they reach a certain number. It might be 10, it might be 15, it might be 20 evaluations, really depending on how many evaluations they do. So large organizations, it may take less than that time period. For smaller organizations, they may not reach sort of that number that we're targeting, just because they just don't do that many evaluations in say a month or so. I think that might be all that I have.
Yeah, I think we'd like to ask for questions
Sure.
about the cost study before we move along. Anybody have a question for Mark about the cost study, the approach, or the goals?
Thanks.
Okay. So I think at this point we're ready then to move on. The rest of our time together, we'd really like to spend hearing from you all. And so we've identified kind of 2 main areas that we'd like to hear from you on. And I think what we'd like to do is have you spend a few moments yourself just in personal reflection, jotting some notes about in the current system, from your vantage point, given the role that you play and the organization that you represent, what are the main challenges or barriers to effective coordination and collaboration around early intervention evaluation services in Colorado? And what solutions do you believe would address those challenges or barriers to improve the process for children and families with regard specifically to the initial early intervention evaluation? And so we'll give you some think time here, and then in the room we'll try to capture the sharing that you all do. Maybe I could ask G to help us with the note taking, if that would be okay. Have some flip charts in the room. I see folks in the room still working, so I don't want to, I want to allow adequate time just to do a check-in with those of you on the phone. If you could let me know if you'd like some additional time to do some personal thinking.
I'm good, Heidi. I know sometimes we shake our heads and you can't hear us, so I just thought I would.
Okay. Thank you, Moira.
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay. Is there anybody that would like some additional time? Okay, perhaps we could just scroll through and each person could share one of their challenges or barriers, and we'll go through until everybody's had a chance to share all that they have noted. Is there one person who would like to get us started? The one on the phone, perhaps?
Heidi, I'll start. This is Amanda from Rocky Mountain.
Thank you, Amanda.
I don't know that I'm going to share anything that everyone in the room doesn't already know, but I think with the CCV our size, one of the things that we run into is obviously meeting the 45-day timeline with the breaks that Child Find takes and trying to keep that going, since we get over 200 referrals a month typically.
So meeting the 45-day timeline is a challenge, and school breaks impact on the capacity for meeting the 45-day timeline?
Yeah, with the number that we receive, it usually means that we're doing evals on our own to try to keep those timelines, you know, met during the summer or winter breaks that happen.
So the other thing I hear you saying, Amanda, is that it requires additional evaluations being completed by Rocky Mountain in order to meet the demand for the evaluations to be completed timely?
Correct.
Okay. Perhaps we could go to another person on the phone. Moira or Sarah or Troy.
Well, I'll add, I think for us, I'm with East Central BOCES, so we serve 20 rural school districts and work with 3 different community center boards. And our setup is that we don't have a set group of people that are responsible for Child Find. It's those individual service providers in some of those different areas, as we're spread out over 8,000 square miles, do this work. And so there is confusion for our families about the role of the different agencies. And a lot of times what we find is that there are some challenges in that collaboration and just coordination of doing the evaluations in cooperation with the community center board folks, because a lot of times their people are just focused in that one area and our people wear multiple hats, so it is somewhat challenging there. And then there are times when the services start for those families and they still think it's the administrative units that are providing the service when it's not. And if they're not happy, then when these kids enter school, they're refusing to work with us in special ed because they didn't receive good service during the Part C process, and they think it was our people that we were the ones providing the service. So there's a confusion in who's doing what.
Thank you, Moira. So we've captured that several challenges there. One, in a geographic area your size, that you're working across multiple CCBs, that there can be role confusion because of the involvement of multiple agencies in that period of time, and that can carry on even beyond the time of the evaluation and service delivery, and that coordination is a challenge generally across the agencies. Okay. Sarah, would you be willing to share next?
Sure. I think that one of our big concerns that we have is around timing as well. We have a couple of different areas that we hit barriers around. One is the school breaks, but also just capacity provided with a set amount of slots. And when we have a more involved month with referrals, we will end up having all these kids start to be bumped back further and further, and they're not going to be able to meet their timelines unless we accommodate in a different way. But we're also really maxed out with our therapists and the services that they provide. So it really causes a lot of push and pull of what is the most important thing to be doing in that moment.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're capturing concerns here again around capacity with regard to ensuring adequate evaluation slots to keep up with the referral demand in particular. And Troy, would you like to share next?
Sure. I'll pick an easy one. Adequate funding.
Thank you. Yes. We'll capture that.
Easy to say.
Easy to say. Okay, and how about someone in the room? Colleen, would you like to go next?
Sure. One of them that I included was the availability of expertise on the really young infants and medically involved infants can be challenging across many of the districts, and it can vary greatly on what's available. I interact with 13 different districts and BOCES, and so what those processes look like are very different, and the capacity of their staff can be very different.
We've got someone scribing here in the room, so we're just giving a chance to catch up with that. Thanks for sharing, Colleen. And Barb, do you have a challenge you'd like to share?
Yeah, mine maybe is a little wider picture. At Peak, we serve any families moving to the state. And so we get calls from families of very young kids who a doctor or a preschool person or somebody told them their child has a problem, and families don't intuitively know they should call their school district. Doesn't make sense if it's a baby. They don't know about the CCD structure. They don't know about early intervention. And so they don't know what to do. Then they go to someone. We're seeing a lot of families who are just going to private therapists and entities and getting services, still not realizing there is a system. And then they hold on to, I want to say it diplomatically, but I mean, the first news that is any news seems like the valid news. So we see this happening.
So late identification and access to the state-funded service.
Yes, maybe no connection at all for a long time until there's a riddle, then they call us and then we try to do that. Another interesting dimension that may be a challenge or barrier, but I just met with a group yesterday. Private therapy entities increasingly are wanting to do their own evaluations and letting kids be part of that. And one of the comments yesterday was, and then when kids go to school, we can connect them with the service system. Very interesting to me, but with some agencies wanting to increase their capacity.
So lack of knowledge on the part of referral entities or service providers about the state-funded system.
And so families who are trying to take care of their child, they just moved here, there are a lot of other complexities, maybe military, maybe cannabis families who have moved here, don't know how to easily connect with the system.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to another round. Moira, do you have an additional challenge you'd like to share or barrier?
Not at this time. I think some of it has been hit on that I had on my
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, I think you were up next. Anything additional?
Sorry, I had to get myself off mute. No, I'm good.
Thanks. And Sarah?
I think that it's been communicated pretty well. I did want to just echo the concern around confusion. While ours is a little bit different, we do have confusion about where the referrals should go for within our primary care physician offices and therapy services. So it echoes out into many different varieties of confusion for referrals. So that would be something that would be great for us to address as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Troy?
I think one of the barriers is just the fact that there are different standards around eligibility around early identification and Part B 321 services, as well as then the corresponding service delivery that falls under those. So that's the barrier.
Different standards of what?
Different criteria for eligibility between Part C and Part B services.
And different service standards probably too.
And different service, the services actually look different or are expected to be provided in a different approach across the two programs. And Troy, can you say more about that from an initial Part C evaluation perspective? Were you thinking about that from a provider or evaluation team member expertise, or just in general in terms of the differences in the system?
I'm thinking about it in the sense that it, a student who qualifies for early intervention may not qualify under Part B, and that's really confusing to families.
Yeah.
And then it's a kid who does qualify under EI might be getting developmentally supportive services under that program that then when they move into the educational environment, such as OT, for instance, let's say, may not be required under Part B, and therefore, it's all that confusion that goes with it.
Sure. Great, thanks for that clarification. Okay, Colleen, did you have an additional challenge or barrier?
I do. A lot of families in our area report challenge related to site-based evaluation and not an availability of in-home evaluation, and just getting there, whether it be transportation or leaving their job or other kinds of taking care of other siblings, that kind of thing. But also some of the districts do multiple appointments, so one for hearing and vision screening and a separate one for evaluation, so that even compounds the problem for those families.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Barb, did you have an additional challenge or barrier?
No, I'm just underscoring Colleen's, I mean, that's what we hear statewide too, not even though we live in the same
Sure.
area.
Is there anyone who has additional challenges or barriers that haven't been shared yet that you'd like to get on the board here?
We have one through chat here.
Okay, thanks. Cindy, I'm sorry, Cindy, your picture isn't showing here, so I think we need to scroll down. Is there anyone else that I missed on the phone? And would you like to share this verbally, or would you like us to read it? Sorry, I didn't call on you.
No, she can't. We can't hear her.
She's muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Now we can. Thank you.
Oh, great. Great. Good. I wanted to add with the implementation of the Go For It process that there's a lot of inefficiency and duplication, I think, with multiple meetings to talk about the same thing between the evaluation and the family assessment aspects. So I think that piece is really confusing for families.
And
then I also wanted to add the CAPTA kids and the challenges and difficulties of trying to get access to getting evaluations for those kids, just based on some of the, I guess, concern or resistance that families have during that process.
so the first one is around the Go For It requirements and some duplication around the two agencies' responsibilities within that initial evaluation process. And the second one is around the mandatory referral of children who experience abuse or neglect and the complexity of their situation and how that influences the opportunity to connect with them for evaluation.
Well, you said that a lot better than me. Thank you.
Are there any additional challenges that haven't been forwarded?
I have a number of them. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Please go ahead.
I'll make them brief.
Yeah.
Brief, but so just general recruitment, retention of not just qualified personnel, in particular in the isolated rural environments where there isn't a full-time need for somebody. So that's a big issue. I think culturally and linguistically diverse families, add on to that. I think there's confusion of perception around CCB, for instance, in terms of their scope of work, historically being related to serving adults with intellectual disabilities, being involved in this work. And so I think that confuses some folks. I also think there's a lack of knowledge between the educational community and the human services community around what each of our requirements are. I think actually the CCBs understand the Part B requirements pretty well, but we don't understand what services, if a kid's identified, what services should be put together, what's the requirement for those services at different levels. So really making sure that both sides understand things. And I would say that there's a perception that that the two agencies don't necessarily work together collaboratively, and so I think that's probably something that we need to be aware of. And that is my list.
Okay, and I'm just checking to make sure that we've forwarded all of those
that are working together. He's meaning what entities?
I think
DHS and CDE.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and yeah.
Thanks, Troy.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. So I think what we'd like to do is move on to solutions. And Did folks have a chance to already jot solutions as well, or do you need another few minutes to identify solutions?
More
Yeah.
time.
Okay, so yeah, let's give you at least 3 minutes, and then we'll check in and see if you need more time.
Maybe I mean,
Yeah.
for me, getting my head.
Let's take about another minute and you let us know if you need more time or if you're ready to report out. I'm going to turn it over to Christy to facilitate this piece.
Okay. So it looks like everybody might be ready to talk about solutions. So we have a good list of what the system's main challenges are at this point. And so why don't we start talking about what ideas we have for solutions to some of these barriers? And do we want to just kind of go down the row of those that are on Zoom? So Sarah, do you want to start? Can't read that far, so if I get a name wrong, tell me.
I mean, there's a variety of different things that I'm sure we'll get into. One thing that we really struggle with in our area is that we have a very finite resource of people who have expertise in our early childhood realm. And so when we have someone sick or go on medical leave, we are really strained to maintain our assessments and our supports for our children. So having some efforts in our state, I know that we have worked on this with some of the universities to really enhance the training and getting some of those professionals out to all of our different communities. That would be huge for us, especially a rural push. I know that, you know, within the larger communities, it's easier to convince someone to drive from one county to the next, but I don't have much luck convincing someone to drive from Denver for an assessment to Grand Junction. I'll stop there and let everyone else share their ideas and loop back.
Can you say a little more about what kinds of trainings you're referring to?
Are you talking about pre-service training?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm sorry, just wanted to clarify if you were talking about working with universities on putting out more individuals with the qualifications needed to conduct evaluations, or if you're also talking about in-service types of training for those already in the field.
It would actually be both. I would say that there are those who are going through their practicum now, and the focus is often for older individuals. And so when I work with some new out-of-school professionals, they may not be comfortable working with early childhood. The other piece is that those who have been in the field for many years, if they've been working with young adults or even you know, older than 5 for their career, they need some support, some technical assistance to get there. And I know that we have been working on trying to maintain that for, or get that in place for our professionals in the state, but I think that we need a little bit more for them. And then the recruitment piece also, to have some of those skilled practitioners who are getting some of the training in other communities to then push that out into our rural zone. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah. Troy, you want to go next?
Sure, thanks. One solution would be to have a early intervention system that's statewide and consistent, you know, with dedicated positions, comprehensive marketing. You know, it'd be nice if our clients had one phone number to call, didn't matter where you lived, one website to go to engage initially, and take some of that confusion out.
Who's next? Amanda?
Hi, I'm not really sure I have a solution to the problem I brought up other than this wonderful pilot program that we're about to embark on. But I think if we had the evaluations starting with the CCBs or the staff at the CCBs instead of with the school system, I do think that would cut down on some of the confusion or some of the hesitation we may have from families that have infants or smaller kids and wonder why they're going to a school or involved with the school district already. And then I do think that with the timelines, being able to have consistent evaluations go across all working days that the CCBs have rather than the school schedule would definitely be helpful.
Can you help me with that one?
Yeah, what did you hear? She talked about the fact that they wanted a consistent days that evaluations would occur across
the calendar year.
The calendar year, not the school year.
Got it.
And that she also, I'm sorry, I'm reading to see if you got it or not. I think she also said that it would probably be helpful if they could start with the community-centered board, and it wouldn't be as confusing for the families to understand why they were going to a school when their child was so little. All right, Moira, you're next.
Some of what people have already touched on were things I had on my list, but I certainly think some type of an awareness campaign that, and I don't know if we need to use social media or what we need to do to really inform our population that seems to be pretty mobile and moving in and out. It's even in our rural areas, it's not the same people that have been here for, you know, the last 50 years like it used to be. I certainly feel that I've been in the BOCES system for 30 some years, and I started out as an OT, and at that point in time, BOCES was the provider for infants and toddlers. They identified kids and provided services, and I think families felt better when it was just one entity that they were dealing with. It wasn't multiple. So I see the value there in supporting families somehow with that one point of referral. And I thought Troy had a great idea if there was some way to make it statewide so that doctors could connect into it. Those other entities that are trying to help refer students and or children, and making it confusing for them, to make sure that they're getting families that they find out early on that might need some support. So other than that, I mean, I can't say that I had all the same things of expanding their expertise, training people, because we do have turnover all the time in people. So yeah, our teams aren't consistent either to know that we have the same people available all the time.
And Cindy's online as well.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, you can't see her.
Cindy?
Yes, sorry, having a hard time finding the right button. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Okay, all right. Actually, you know, one of my comments really has to do with wanting to talk about, I think, a lot of our successes. We volume probably 75 or more kids through every week. And if it weren't for, I think, the great relationships and coordination that we already have with our school districts, there's absolutely no way that could happen. So we really value that. And so I think looking towards some of those successes and the investments that I think every partner has in terms of getting kids the service, getting kids and families the services that they need is a really important piece of the solution. I think collaboratively asking, you know, kind of how do we make this work so that as our systems have evolved and with the implementation of Go For It, things do look different. So how do we make that happen so that it's a seamless transition between evaluation and IFSP? I think that's one of the huge bumps we have right now, and that affects what it costs, because as we're being inefficient, then it means we're having multiple meetings for multiple teams, and that's costly. As far as the captive stuff goes, I'm not sure. I know a lot of energy and effort has been put into trying to figure that out. I don't know if some of the screening pilots have been helpful, but I do know it needs more attention.
Yes. So I think, Cindy, you were saying that on top of the collaborative successes, we want to make sure that we continue to take those into consideration, but also developing a way for a seamless transition for families between the evaluation and the IFSP development.
Yes.
Okay. And you also mentioned sort of kind of continuing our hard work towards that captive population. We don't have a solution at this point for that, but that certainly is something we are looking towards. All right, now was that everybody on the Zoom? And Colleen?
So given the accountability requirements for the CCBs around Part C regulations and requirements, I feel like centralizing early intervention evaluations there makes sense. However, I think that there has to be some other proactive thoughts about how we might regionally support those capacity needs, the expertise needs, those kinds of things where it doesn't exist everywhere in the state, and how do we think beyond just a CCB structure or an AU structure to consider supporting that.
All right, you got that, G?
No, you're being, thank you for describing.
Yes, thank you. You're working hard. Hard.
No, she has to take
I was going to say, there's
not in my right arm.
Well, first of all, I'm a ruminator, so I want to think about the challenges to be able to figure out strategies. So it's a little hard for me. A few things. One is, in terms of costs, and maybe we've already brought this up, but the fiscal costs are real. I mean, there's no disputing, but the costs and impact on families when we have systems that are not smooth are huge. All the meetings, people, I mean, that was mentioned as well. People have to get off work. Some families are quitting jobs, et cetera. So that's more of a challenge, but a riddle to uncover. I think the other two things I would say, or the other thing that resonates, is this idea of, to follow Troy, marketing and having a service delivery. If we could have a more uniform statewide message, it would certainly help us with peak, because we serve families in every part of the state. And we're proudly the Wild West in Colorado, and we are so locally autonomous. And so, and not only that, when I stand back and look, we have CCBs who have a long-standing culture for services in their areas, and their areas are different from AU's, et cetera. So to help families, and I would guess to have the system be efficient, if we could somehow transcend those kinds of things, and maybe that would take real leadership to have a new vision as to why to do that. But I think that would really help families, and I would think probably efficiencies as well. Can I just say one more thing? What also I think has been brought up is that families increasingly are moving. Whether it's in a district, it's across the street, whether it's to another community, they go remote, they go to the city. And so having systems that seem so different, and even having two AUs operate early childhood so differently is perplexing. And then community center boards are very, very different too. So families have a tough time trying to, unless they're in an ideal place and everything falls into place. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm. So overarching, we're hearing consistency across any system would be a good solution for some of these challenges and barriers. Okay. Do we need to do another? Oh,
well, I just have a process question, because there are folks who aren't here today, and I think we absolutely need to ask these questions of the other participants in this group and get it recorded as part of this work, even though they're not here.
We can certainly reach out to those that didn't have a chance to be here today. Great idea. Mary Ann.
And, you know, owing to what Marzano and APA are doing, my question to add to that would be, is that the work group going to do that as part of the stakeholder engagement elements they're doing, or is that part of the study?
In terms of taking in this input and sifting it. So Carrie at Marzano and Mark are collecting data from today's conversation and from any other input or feedback that relates to study components in future meetings, and that will be a part of what they're analyzing. For example, we did a similar activity at the Colorado Interagency Coordinating Council meeting last week, and they're doing a focus group, you know, with child find coordinators, for example, at our February meeting. So this kind of information that we're gathering from you today will absolutely be a part of what is considered by Marzano in making some conclusions.
So I think to wrap this one up, I think we need to do another round to make sure that everybody's talked about solutions that they have. Sarah, do you have anything additional?
Nothing additional at this point.
Okay, how about you, Troy?
Yeah, I have two more for you. I think we need to establish a well-articulated collaborative process in the C to B transition. You know, we want to make sure that that we're delicate with families and helping them understand the differences and why things shift. And then I also think it's helpful, or would be helpful in an ideal world, to have shared data out of the early intervention system so that school districts can staff up for kids that might be coming in. You know, we typically have a 6-month window, but if I'm dealing with a student who needs, you know, really unique services in a small setting, that may require a little bit longer planning window. So.
Thank you. We captured both of those.
Did we get those? Okay. Amanda, do you have
No, I
another
think everything's covered. I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Moira?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. How about you, Cindy? Did you say all the solutions you were thinking of?
I did, thank you.
Okay. And Colleen?
My final one is just always making sure that an in-home option is available to every family, whether it's considered or found to be the most effective or not, that in order to support families who struggle with getting to a site, that always be an option.
So in-home, always an option regardless of whether it's the standard. Okay. Barb, did you say everything?
I would second Colleen's point in terms of what we hear from families, particularly from other states. Sometimes families say it's really hard here because we have a different service delivery model, and then families get IDEA out and start quoting the law to us. So, anyway, I underscore Colleen.
All right, so I think that wraps up. I have a question following Mary Ann's process question. Do we want, for those that aren't here, do we want to just put those 2 questions out, or do we want to wait until these have been documented, send those out, and have them?
Mary and I we minimized our side conversation. Very quiet, we hope. But we're suggesting that perhaps what we do is once these are all documented, that perhaps what we do is put it out in the Google Doc, and then that way people can review it to make sure it's captured accurately, and then add additional items so that then we would just put those in the final form.
Okay. And I would assume people are going to leave here and go, oh, I wanted to say this or that.
Right? Especially the ruminators, right?
Yeah.
Does that feel like a good next step?
I would just ask, in terms of clear, short timeline study process, that remember the upstream, midstream, downstream chart? This is kind of some of the upstream stakeholders, yes?
That's correct.
Okay, and so that there needs to be a high level of cross-sharing of this incoming with Marzano as the contractor for integration, rather than a standalone for how this could be pushed through to June. Okay? And some recommendation thinking.
Great, so we have 5 minutes left, and we actually, but even with starting late, we were actually able to get through. So kudos everyone. I want to thank everyone for really putting in a lot of good thinking today. I know it started off a little rough in terms of trying to get here. And those of you who, I know that those of you who are participating remotely, it can be really challenging to participate remotely, so thank you for hanging in there and being such full-fledged participants. So in terms of next steps, I think we just confirmed that one of our next steps will be to place all of these, the concerns or the challenges and the recommendations into a Google Doc to enable continued refinement. Another piece will be to ensure that these are also shared with Marzano, because we want to make sure that all of this gets integrated into their work. We have our next meeting in the future.
February
20, thank you. Thank you for someone remembering. I was actually frantically looking through notes to see if I could find it, but I couldn't find it fast enough. So are there some suggestions for what we ought to, of course, we'll keep up to date on what's happening. That's kind of what we would always anticipate as part of our agenda, is to let you know, like, what's the status of the work, what are upcoming decisions that we might be making, and where do we need some of your advice. Are there other suggestions of what should be included on the agenda for February?
And I did capture a request from someone earlier in the meeting that you'd like to know where the pilot sites are located, so that you have an opportunity to consider how that might be representing the whole state. And so we'll make sure that that information gets shared out as well with the meeting notes from today.
Great.
That'd be great.
This is Cindy. If we could maybe have in advance the kinds of questions like you asked at the very end here, so that maybe not only think about it ourselves, but ask our particular group for their input.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll continue to place those on the agenda as we did for today.
I wonder if it would be helpful to put a Q&A document together, to address, for instance, the rumors about timing and stuff like that. Just something official so that we can alleviate some of the fear in the field and address that.
We actually do have a document that we've been collecting questions and responding to with answers, which is hyperlinked, I think, or
we'll make
yeah,
sure
I believe it.
that.
Yeah, we'll make sure that you have access to that again. We're continually adding additional answers to questions, and we do still have some questions that have not yet been answered. So we will continue to work through that and then make sure that that gets publicized again.
And that does address that question, does it not?
Yeah, it does. Does it say the question about when it's going to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. And where can we find this?
It's a public document with a link to in our Google folder, and we'll make sure that those of you on the phone receive that, or all of you in this group receive that again. It's something that we've shared throughout the process, but it's now a cumulative kind of FAQ. It started with just a small batch, and then we've been adding over time.
And the first few questions were around what happens after June 30th.
And I think before we can be that, or I mean, if you want to look at it prior to when we send out the notes, it was included in the meeting information. There was a hyperlink within the body of the email, separate from the attachment to the information about this meeting.
Thanks, Christy. If you, when reviewing those questions and answers, any feedback that you would have about them would be welcome. Like if it generates further questions, or we would be very, we'd be very interested in hearing that.
And the document is organized in the most current questions that have been answered. So you scroll down and you'll see those first questions that we first got in, and then work your way up.
So just as in closing, are there any additional items that, or are there items that you would like us to include on the February agenda? We will ask again in advance, but I just wanted to see if there's anything in it, like right now, that comes to mind. So we'll send out a draft agenda and get your feedback on that to see if there's anything in addition that you would like to include. Again, we want to thank everyone for your participation, those of you who braved the roads from far and near. Thank you. Those of you who had to come here because this is your job, thank you. Thank you for being here anyway. And great. We all look forward to seeing you either virtually or in person in February. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for nice leadership today. Sometimes
Great
these
job.
are
Thank you.
hard to do.
If you leave your name pins, we'll make sure that we have them for you.